My name is Walter Briggs, and this year I turned 85. I'm not a special man, I'm just an old soldier who happened to survive hell at Pearl Harbor back in 1941 when the smoke hadn't cleared and the sirens still screamed in my head. I was already holding a rifle, not for glory, not for honor, but because the men beside me needed me to survive. I made it out not because I was better than anyone else, but because I was luckier than most, the ones who never came home, the ones who now sleep beneath the cold waters of Oahu. There are names I still remember, faces I still see in my dreams, and every year on December 7th I put on my old uniform, pin the medals to my chest, and walk to the memorial park in this little town. I stand in silence beneath the trees and remember the brothers who never returned. I don't expect anyone to notice me. I don't hope for bowed heads. I just want one day each year to close my eyes and see those men smile at me like they did when they were alive. That year the memorial was more crowded than usual. I wasn't sure why. Maybe the town had promoted the event, or maybe the schools made attendance mandatory. I stood next to the monument, my hand resting on the faded Navy insignia, my vision blurred, not because of age, but because of the memories crashing back. I could hear again the roar of enemy planes, the thunder of bombs shaking the earth, and the screams of men calling to one another through smoke and fire. I could even hear Billy's name, the boy who was blown apart in front of me before he had a chance to fire a single shot. I was drowning in the past when laughter erupted behind me. I lifted my head and turned around. Two young men, maybe 18 or 19, dressed in hoodies and baseball caps, one filming with his phone, the other pointing at me with a mocking grin. This old dude thinks he's some kind of superhero. Look at that getup. Who even cares about Pearl Harbor anymore? I didn't say anything. I just stood there. People nearby began to turn and look, some with pity in their eyes, others looking away in embarrassment, but no one said a word. I thought they'd stop, but they didn't. The kid with the phone took another step forward, looked me in the eye, and spat on the ground right in front of my freshly polished shoes, then laughed. "You should go home, man. No one wants your war stories. The world's moved on." In that moment I didn't feel anger or outrage like you might expect. I felt an emptiness, a vast hollow space between generations. I didn't blame them. I just felt sorrow for those who died, sorrow for a world where some kids don't understand what sacrifice means. I stood up straight, saluted the monument, and turned to walk away. No one stopped me. No one called me back. I walked through that crowd with a weight on my chest. It felt like I was burying something sacred, like the memory of an entire era was being dusted over by indifference and entitlement. That night I sat alone on my porch. The cold wind rustled the old wooden fence with a sound like time breathing. I poured myself a cup of tea, stared out into the distance, and tried to clear my mind. I asked myself, maybe it was time for men like me to fade away. Maybe the new generation didn't need our stories. Maybe they never cared in the first place. I wasn't on social media. I had no idea that the video those boys recorded had gone viral. I didn't know people were talking about me across the country. I just sat there in silence, thinking that maybe next year I'd skip the uniform. Maybe I'd just remember my brothers in silence and spare myself the disrespect. The next morning I went back to the park as usual, but this time I didn't wear the uniform. I didn't pin on the medals. I stood far from the monument, watched it from a distance, then went back home. I didn't speak to anyone, didn't shake any hands. I moved like a shadow of myself until that afternoon a black SUV pulled up in front of my house. A tall man in uniform stepped out, sharp posture, silver hair, crisp army dress uniform with two shining silver stars on his collar. He walked to my front door and knocked 3 times. I opened it, and he removed his hat, then said in a firm, respectful voice, "Good afternoon, Mr. Briggs. My name is Major General Thomas R. Cavanaugh. I've come to apologize." I didn't understand at first. I blinked and asked slowly, "Apologize? For what, General?" He looked me in the eye with a gaze that held both pain and resolve, then said, "The boy in the video, that was my son." I stood there stunned, not angry, not bitter, just surprised that of all the people in this country, the man at my door was the father of one of the boys who had trampled the most sacred memory of my life. He went on to say, he wasn't here as a commanding officer, but as a father who had failed to teach his son. He admitted that duty had kept him away too long, that he missed the years when his son needed guidance, and now this was the result. I saw no performance in his words, no pretense in his tone, only a genuine sorrow. He had no bodyguards, no reporters, just one soldier standing before another with a bowed head. He said he couldn't undo what his son had done, but he wanted me to know not everyone in this generation was ungrateful. Not everyone had forgotten what our sacrifices meant. I didn't know what to say. I placed my hand on his shoulder and told him that honor isn't in the medals or the uniform, it's in our actions, and today he had shown more honor than many I'd met in a lifetime. As he left, I sat back on my old porch chair and breathed a little easier. The ache in my chest wasn't as sharp. I realized then that sometimes people disrespect us not out of hatred but out of ignorance, and somewhere out There are people like this general still believed in respect and gratitude. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if that boy will ever feel remorse, but I know that today I heard a sincere apology, and that's enough to make me believe that honor is not dead, it's just sleeping in the hearts of those who haven't yet learned what it truly means. 3 days after the general left, I was once again sitting in my old wooden chair on the porch. The small yard was still silent. The morning wind had cooled the tea in my hand, and the breeze whispered through the broken fence. But something inside me had changed. I no longer felt the same heaviness as before. I wasn't expecting anything. I wasn't waiting for anyone. But when a gray car pulled up in front of the gate and a young man stepped out, I knew it was time to face something neither of us could avoid. He wore a white shirt and simple jeans, held a cap in his hands, and stood motionless at the gate. His eyes no longer carried the arrogance I had seen in the video. There was no mocking grin, only lowered eyes, filled with remorse and hesitation. "I'm General Kavanaugh's son," he said, his voice trembling. "My name is Kyle. I came to apologize, sir." I looked at him for a long moment, then nodded and invited him inside. We didn't speak as we walked through the doorway and into the living room, where old photos of my unit still hung on the wall, and a faded American flag rested silently in a wooden frame. "Mr. Briggs," Kyle began, but stopped himself. He took a deep breath before continuing. "There's no excuse for what I did. I was wrong, completely wrong, and I feel ashamed of myself every time I remember it." I didn't say a word. I took a sip of my tea and set the cup down slowly. "I thought I was smart," he went on. "I thought I understood the world, that social media was a place to get attention, to stand out. I didn't know anything about you. I didn't know anything about the war or what you went through. I just saw an old man standing there and thought it was funny. I thought history didn't matter anymore. But when my dad came home, he didn't yell at me. He cried. It was the first time I had ever seen my father cry like a child. He said I had hurt a great man, and that he failed to teach me honor. I stayed silent, listening as this young man searched through the wreckage of his guilt, trying to put into words something real. My father told me about Pearl Harbor, about men like you," Kyle continued, his voice cracking. "He said you're the reason he got to grow up in a free country, the reason I got to go to school and live in peace. He said it's because of men like you who stood up when the world was falling apart." I looked at Kyle closely for the first time. His face was thinner than before. His eyes were wet, and his hands trembled as he clutched his old cap. "I didn't come because my dad made me," he said. "I came because I couldn't live with myself unless I apologized to you. I don't want to be ungrateful. I want to understand. I want to learn. I want to know why an old man keeps standing there every year in uniform, honoring something most of the world has already forgotten." I took a long breath and finally spoke. "You know, Kyle, I don't stand there because I like to relive war. I stand there because I can't let my brothers be forgotten. Because if no one remembers, then they die all over again. I don't need applause. I just need 1 minute of silence so I can close my eyes and remember the men who smiled with me in hell." Kyle lowered his head, and tears rolled down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. "Can you forgive me?" he asked quietly. I looked out the window, where sunlight filtered through the trees, and said slowly, "Forgiveness isn't erasing what happened, it's giving someone the chance to start again. If you came here today with a true heart, then you've already begun." I stood, walked over to a wooden cabinet, opened it, and took out something wrapped in an old cloth. I returned to the table and laid it in front of Kyle. Slowly, I unwrapped it. Inside was a small piece of fabric, faded and scorched at the edge. It had some faint signatures and a few handwritten lines. It was a piece of the flag from the ship I had served on, salvaged during that terrible day and kept all these years. "This is yours," I said. "Not as a gift, but as a reminder. That freedom is never free. That respect isn't given with words but earned through actions." Kyle held the fabric with both hands, like it was something sacred. And then he broke down and wept, truly wept, like a child mourning something he finally understood. From that day on, every Saturday afternoon, Kyle came back to my house. He brought notebooks and questions about history. He was no longer the kid with a phone and a cruel smirk. He became a student, someone who listened, who winced when he heard the names of the fallen, who treated each black and white photo with quiet reverence. He brought coffee. I made tea. He swept the porch. I told stories. He took notes. He didn't have to do any of it. But he wanted to. And then one day, as the sun was setting and our talk had drifted into silence, Kyle stood and said, "I'm enlisting, Mr. Briggs. I want to serve. I want to become the kind of man that, if one day you speak of me, you won't feel ashamed." I looked at him with a silent pride and simply said, "Then do it, not for me, but for yourself, and for those who will walk beside you someday." That winter came earlier than usual. The air grew colder, and the wind carried the scent of damp earth through the narrow streets. I lay in my old room, a thin blanket covering my chest, the radio humming quietly beside me with the morning news. The doctor had told me 3 months ago that the lung cancer was inoperable. They offered chemotherapy, but I refused. At this age, I had no desire to be kept alive by machines. I had lived enough, loved enough, lost enough. The only thing left was time and memories. I didn't tell Kyle. The boy was still in basic training. I knew he'd return for the memorial this year because he had promised in his last letter, handwritten in that neat, disciplined style. "I'll stand next to you this year, Mr. Briggs. I want people to see that respect isn't dead, and I owe that to you." I kept that letter in my drawer, reading it so many times the folds had worn thin. I wondered if I'd have enough strength left to stand beside him one last time. A week before the memorial, I started coughing up blood. The home nurse said my time was running out. They wanted to take me to the hospital. I shook my head. I wanted to die in my own home, where the walls still held the scent of tobacco, where the pictures on the wall still captured laughter long gone. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was only afraid of dying before I could say a final word to the only person in years who had made me believe that the old values I carried were still alive. The day before the memorial, the rain came. I lay listening to the drops tapping the tin roof, staring at the ceiling. I must have dozed off when I heard the door open. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, then my bedroom door creaked. Kyle stood there, in uniform, his cap in his hand, eyes filled with worry. He was soaked through, probably ran straight from the bus station. "Mr. Briggs," he said, then paused when he saw how thin I'd become, my skin pale like parchment. "Come here," I whispered, my voice weak but steady. He walked to my bedside, knelt down, and placed his hand over mine. "I'm sorry. I got here late." "You're not late," I smiled, gripping his hand, feeling the youth and warmth in his fingers, clinging to mine like he feared I might vanish. I closed my eyes for a moment, then looked at him again. "Kyle, you've changed. Not just you, but the world around you. And that makes me believe my life wasn't lived in vain." He bowed his head, tears falling silently onto the bedsheet. "I won't let you go alone. Tomorrow, I'll stand beside you." I chuckled softly. "Just not sure I can still stand." The next morning, as the sun barely rose behind the trees and the mist clung to the rooftops, Kyle helped me out of bed, wrapping my old uniform jacket around me. The fabric had faded, but the buttons still shone, the insignia still intact. He gently placed me in the wheelchair and pushed me out toward the park where the memorial would be held. The small riverside park was already filling up. There were townspeople, veterans, students, and a group of young soldiers standing in formation near the flagpole. I could feel eyes turning as Kyle and I arrived, an old man on the edge of life, and a young soldier in his prime, past and future walking side by side. When the national anthem played, Kyle stood firm beside me, eyes fixed on the sky. I looked at his face, it was calm, resolute, not the boy who once mocked me at last year's ceremony, but a man who now understood what it meant to serve something greater than himself. After the service ended, Kyle pushed me toward the stone monument engraved with the names of those who died at Pearl Harbor. My trembling hand reached for a name I knew well, James or Holloway, my best friend, who died beside me when the first bomb hit our ship. I kept the promise, Jimmy, I whispered. There's someone to carry it on now. Kyle quietly pulled a letter from his pocket. Sir, I wrote this for you. In case you couldn't read it, I want you to hear it now. He unfolded the letter, voice shaking slightly but strong. Dear Mr. Briggs, I can't fully express how grateful I am, not just because you forgave me, but because you showed me what it truly means to live with honor. I used to think strength meant standing out, taking control. But you taught me real strength is the courage to be quiet when the world is loud, the patience to stand alone when no one understands. You didn't lecture me, you lived the lesson. You gave me a legacy, not in words, but in how you lived, humble, loyal, unshakable. Whether you're here or not, I promise I will stand where you once stood, so that men like you, and those who fell, are never forgotten. I closed my eyes, lips barely moving. Thank you, son. That afternoon, I said no more. On the way home, I sat quietly in the wheelchair, holding Kyle's hand, heart at peace. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the rooftops, I closed my eyes one final time, and passed in peace, knowing my spirit would not be alone. At my funeral, Kyle wore his uniform, standing at full attention as the flag over my casket was folded. He didn't cry, but his eyes were red. Sewn neatly onto his chest was a patch, a small square from the flag I once gave him, a silent vow that he would carry forward what I left behind. And every year after that, on Memorial Day, people saw a young soldier standing before the stone monument, hand on his chest, eyes toward the sky, fulfilling a promise made by an old veteran who no longer stood but was never truly gone.